Hello there, it's time for Press Pass. My name is Mark Masai, and today we focus on the university crisis. This is what's coming up.
The strike is on until the 2017-2021 CBA is negotiated, signed, implemented, and money banked.
What exactly is the story behind the lecturer strike that is affecting over 600,000 students? And this is a focus because if it's not affecting you directly, if you're not one of the 600,000 students, you either are someone who is supporting one of the students or is actually a stakeholder and definitely would be interested in this issue. And that's why we're making it the main topic and focus of our discussion tonight. I have with me Dr. Wandia Njoya. She is a senior lecturer. You've seen her also in various capacities here on Press Pass and other shows. Thank you for joining us. Next to her is Professor Nyaigoti Chacha. He is the chairman of the Commission for Education, for University Education, and he has a lot to say on the standard of the education, the quality of education we are getting in the tertiary level of our institutions. And next to him is another professor. He is George Osanjo. He is a lecturer himself, but as well as for this conversation, he is representing WASU as a trustee. And next to him is my colleague here and my senior, that is David Aduda. He is an editor and an education specialist, has been following this education issue for not just the weeks, but over the years as he has been part of the media fraternity. So the University Academic Staff Union has reiterated that the strike by the public universities is still on, and WASU says they are not taking any other offers but the implementation of the 2017-2021 Comprehensive Bargaining Agreement, describing as a sham what the Interpublic University Council's Consultative Forum, that is IPUCCF's, offer being.
Parliament directed the National Treasury to give a counter-offer. Did the National Treasury interpret that to mean that union officials should be given a 5-year leave of absence? Parliament meant National Treasury should offer funds for review of pay package of university workers. In word, IPUCCF has refused to begin, and WASU has categorically rejected the sham document IPUC presented at the negotiated table. I want to tell our members wherever they are, don't return to work before a return to work formula is negotiated. If you report back to work without a negotiated return to work formula, I want to tell you that you are on your own. The union is very categorical. The strike is on until the 2017-2021 CBA is negotiated, signed, implemented, and money banked.
So let's get to it now and first of all address whether we as a media have gotten the story right, represented the facts as we should have. We have some of the stakeholders here, and yes, you can send in your views as you continue following the conversation. I'll start with you, Dr. Njoya. You are a critic and you closely follow how we do cover these issues. Has this been adequately covered? Do you feel that it has been explained to the public well in terms of the issues that are being addressed?
I think we are facing the same problem we faced with the doctor strike, in that we are not getting the reason why this matters. And so the lecturers are coming off as just talking about their salaries, and we are not understanding why the public should care about what is happening in the universities.
Right. And you probably have seen one of the stories, Professor Chacha, and that is like the one that was on in the Daily today, in the Daily Nation page 2, and that is universities offer WASU chiefs 5-year leave in a bid to end the Don's strike. Just having seen it by at the face of it, is it something that has represented the facts of the status quo from your view?
I think from where I stand, I am not sure whether the question is about leave. Whether if we allowed the WASU leaders some time to serve the union without any punishment or action taken against them, we will be solving the problem. I think the problem cuts into the deep end of the waters. We are just at the periphery when we talk about small things like how to address the leadership. I think the university fraternity in terms of the lecturers are very many people, including those officials as well as those who are not officials. I think we needed to be able to understand why is it that up until now we cannot sit down and talk frankly about what challenges we are facing,
yes,
and how to find the solution. Because meanwhile, the students are not being given lectures. They are not being attended to by the lecturers because they're on strike. Some universities have actually closed some of their campuses, and the country will suffer because, as we were anticipating, when these students will have finished their degrees, they cannot finish now. And since they cannot finish, it means whichever gap they were going to fill as far as the human resource capital is concerned, those will not be filled. Mm-hmm. So I think we needed to have a candid discussion as a nation around the strike so that we don't treat it as something which is composed of mischievous individuals who are out against the government.
Okay.
We need to address ourselves, where did it start? And if we are talking about 2017-2021 CBA, when it was negotiated, I believe that all the parties, including the government side, were represented. And they need to recap and ask themselves, whatever agreement they came across, how has it become very difficult to implement it? Okay. And if it is very difficult to implement it, what alternatives do we have so that our universities can continue functioning?
Okay, he's mentioned some of the themes that, of course, would inform conversation on what is going on. The strike that has been on since March 1st. As you have been following this as WASU trustee, as you've been following the coverage of it, do you feel it is well explained, the issues that you are agitating for from the WASU standpoint? Is it being explained well to the public, or as Dr. Wandia Njoya has mentioned, it's making it look like it's just about the salaries?
Yeah, I think some of the coverage has been fair, and even though we see today's headline as trivial, unfortunately, that is what the government wants to make this CB about. Okay. It's very interesting because the government, what they put as an offer to WASU's proposal is that the union officials will be given a 5-year leave of absence, as if that is what is making the lecturers go on strike. Lecturers cannot go on strike on such a trivial issue. But believe it or not, that is what they put on the table. A CBA, a collective bargaining agreement, is a document that contains the terms and conditions of service of lecturers and other employees. It has many things. Apart from the pay package, there's the issue of the pay package. Yes, it's one of the key issues in the WASU recognition agreement with the government. So therefore, any counter-offer must address this. And I think the tragedy of this is that we're in this a crisis that we could have avoided. This CBA is called a 2017-2021 CBA. It's a CBA that should have been implemented 1st July 2017. And now we are nearly 10 months from 1st July 2017, and it has not been implemented, and that's why the lecturers are on strike. And it is not, I think, as been characterized by Professor Chacha, yes, part of the problem is a failure of dialogue, social dialogue between the partners. I think the union, where I come from, has tried its best, because right from March 2017, that's more than 1 year ago, it made a proposal, and actually they had an agreement with the government and IPUCCF that this CBA be negotiated, signed by 31st May. Then, of course, there were a number of things. The government said, you know, the parliament is dissolved. Then in July, there was an election, you know, a long election cycle, so nothing could be done. Then they said, okay, let's do this in December, from December 18th to January 31st.
Yeah.
Come December 18th, IPUCCF, which is the Interpublic University Councils that negotiates with the unions, said, you know, Christmas is just around here. Why can't we do this in January, in mid-January? So they postponed a number of the meetings, but then there was a deadline of 31st January. When time came for that meeting, they said, you know what, we have new leaders at the Ministry of Education. That is Cabinet Secretary Amina Mohammed and Principal Secretary Professor Micheni Ntiba. Why don't we give them another week? The union said, okay, we'll give you a week or two. Mid-February, nothing had happened. February 21st, the union said, really, now you are really taking us around the circles. We are issuing a strike notice, a 7-day strike notice. They should have taken the time during the 7-day strike notice to resolve this crisis. But then they just slept on their laurels. Nothing happened. And now we're on strike. We've been on strike from March 1st. We are 47 days on strike. This is nearly 7 weeks. 7 weeks is nearly half a semester. And as we've said, nearly 600,000 students are affected. All public universities, the 31 of them, 10,000 lecturers on strike. It is a big crisis, and it's affecting students, and even lecturers really feel for them.
Right.
Where I come from, you know, we say lecturers, we teach, we do research, we offer service. Where I work, which is at Kenyatta National Hospital, we also offer healthcare. And this morning, I passed through our campus to see what was going on. For sure, there's no learning taking place. But also, the patients are suffering because doctors who are lecturers there, the specialists, give health care at Kenyatta National Hospital.
Yes.
And so people are suffering. It's really a big crisis.
And Aduda, as you hear, he's given somewhat the history, the background leading up to today, where we are, and the attempts to get to the negotiating table and get to a solution. And as an editor who's been keen on education matters, have we done enough in terms of setting the agenda, or do we just capture it when it is the strikes? And we probably show some of the pictures there, my director, of the lecturers being on strike. Actually, a picture that you struggle seeing because this is a respectable, profession. You don't want to see that, but we run to that kind of picture and follow them when there is drama.
Right. First, I like the elaboration by Dr. Sanjo here. He's given the background. The media has articulated the events as they unfold. Now, one of the areas that I think we have failed in is going deep into the substance, in the sense that the strike is much more than the salary and the compensation. There's much more to it. I see beneath it lecturers talking about the conditions prevailing at the universities in terms of the facilities that are obtaining, in terms of their workload, in terms of the quality of teaching that is going on, and the fact that there is no funds even to do research, which really forms the three aspects of any university's mission. So I see, in a sense, in which the media has scratched the surface, giving the events as unfold. And I want to say that part of the problem with this is that media goes by drama, the actions. So when the lecturers are on the street, that makes drama, makes very good picture, but it doesn't go to the depth. I recognize the fact that the universities, for example, the questions of promotions, there are many lecturers who stagnated at the level of just a senior lecturer. There are many who have been lecturer for years, they've not been promoted. We hardly have opportunities where lecturers also attend conferences, present papers, to expand their knowledge and contribute to knowledge, which really should be the issue. So I see those other intangible elements not coming out in the media.
Okay. And it's our responsibility to do so. And as in the reportage, you hear this 2017 to 2021 CBA that they're agitating for. And earlier you mentioned there's a framing that's making it look like it's all about the salary. But isn't it that when you hear Constantine Wasonga say until the money is backed, then we can work, we can go back to class? Isn't it immediately the immediate cause or concern the money?
Okay, let me just reiterate what Aduda has said, that education is actually a very difficult topic to cover. It's not as dramatic except when the teachers are dancing in the streets, as you see. So it's very difficult to keep public interest in the lecturer strike. But when I'm talking about the bigger issues, I'm not talking about it just from the lecturer's point of view, but from the point of view of what is university education for and why does a country have it.
Okay.
I think there are bigger questions about, for example, why is there a stalemate and why does the why does the country not think that this is something urgent to talk about? Because we are sacrificing generations of young people when we are keeping them at home. So that's a bigger question that the public needs to be asking, because the lecturers are already holding their own by talking about the working terms. And if university education is important in our country, why are we not paying the lecturers as they deserve? Not just because of papers and what they want, but because university education is important to Kenya. So those are the bigger questions that we need to talk about. And for me, I'm becoming deeply suspicious that it is not a coincidence that we are seeing so much havoc across the universities. I think there has been a worry among the political elite about having many educated young people without jobs. And so if they can stave off the number of people who are graduating, politically it's much easier. So I think those are the bigger questions that the public needs to start asking, and which needs a creative journalist to start asking those questions
and keep the public interested. But on that issue of the conspiracy there, in terms of the government not wanting a large number of the populace, let's say, being awakened, through education. But actually, wouldn't it play to their interest to see that more people have access to education? They keep saying that this is one of their main agendas. That's the government.
Yeah, the problem is it's really nice when they have the degrees, but after the degrees and there are no jobs, then now it starts becoming a political problem, especially because then you have graduates who are able to articulate the issues and ask questions about economic management, because they start to see the links between economic mismanagement of the country and their inability to have work. So they would rather that we go to the young people go to TVET, where they just learn the manual work, but they don't start to make connections between my job and what is happening in the economy in the country and what is happening in the economy globally. Okay. Those are the questions which politicians don't want Kenyans to start answering.
Well, on the education front and what it's important, you say indeed university education is very important for our country and its state. And you can jump in at whichever point, interject. Is it important that we explain what is entailed in the 2017-2021 CBA for the public?
I think it is very critical, because we keep on making reference to the CBA. There are very many Kenyans who do not understand what the CBA is.
Yes.
So in terms of media information and interaction between media and the public, we need to decipher and isolate the information that is contained in a general CBA as far as work rights are concerned. And for this purpose, the specific 2017-2021 CBA. What did it say? What conditions, what terms, what agreements? Because the CBA is a collective bargaining agreement. It has two sides: those who are demanding and those who are responding. So it's important for us to say on this number one, the demands were ABC. the responses have not been forthcoming or have come through and met part of what was expected to be met, so that we can understand critically what the agitation issues are. And then secondly, we need to be able to understand from the future, because this is a challenge that we have had for quite a while now. And we need to ask ourselves, if universities, both public and private, are body corporates, they are individuals, how come when it comes to public university system, we collectivize people from a number of universities and look at them as one entity? And yet perhaps their employers is not the Ministry of Education. So we need to ask ourselves as a nation, as a public, at what point did we make this understanding our mentality to believe that all matters pertaining to staff welfare, pertaining to what lecturers deserve to be offered, should be determined by the Ministry of Education? When in fact,
who else should, if not?
The councils? Because what I think we should be talking about is, can we empower councils so that each council can offer salaries which they can afford at whatever level? They can have a benchmark, they can have a starting point, but at the same time, if you look at universities all over the world, even when they are classified as state universities, for example, in America, there is one state university, is a state university in the same state, which can say, as far as we are concerned, we are able to attract the best professors and we pay them double the salary which they are getting in other universities. So that at the end of the day then, these individual people who are employed by University X, which is currently public, are managed by the individual university councils. And the individual university councils will approve budget, and in that budget they will have created even better terms than the terms which are offered by another university.
Is that the ideal picture, or is that realistic?
I'm just thinking that we have to find a way of unlocking ourselves from this perennial problem of strikes.
Yes.
We have had strikes for many years. This is not the first time University UWASU is bringing us to where we are, where now there is no teaching. We need to ask ourselves, how do we, as an informed society, remove ourselves from these perennial strikes?
That's true.
Yeah, just to, on that point, I think it is not really correct to say that is UWASU who is bringing us to where we are to this crisis. I think, as we've said before, it is the government that is bringing us to this crisis. Yes. They are the ones. You see, this thing was supposed to start, if we are talking about the CBA, it is something that they were supposed to have solved last year, more than 1 year ago. But they did not. This is why we have the crisis. So it's the government and the university councils. As to why we should have university councils together as IPUCCF, it is the government that decided that way. In fact, the union never said that they wanted the councils to be together. But it's the Ministry of Education that constituted the Interpublic Councils Consultative Forum, IPUCCF, as a member of FKE. So they decided that, look, they look at the law, and I think the Attorney General advised them that the best way of negotiating is for the employers to form a federation, an employers federation, and then they will negotiate with the unions collectively. It was a government decision, it was not the union decision. As to why, whether there's a move towards centralization, Prof is the chairman of Commission for University Education. They are the ones who harmonize everything. For example, you can see they are developing standards for the university. There are some places where they have done well, but some of those things, as Mr. Duda said, are really hurting the lecturers. For example, the criteria for promotion, as Mr. Duda says, people really stagnate more than 20, 30 years on the same, in the same grade at the university. Yeah, it is really unbelievable. Right. And in terms of the other issues that really affect the universities, as my colleague has said, there is the work environment and the learning environment. You have said that there are over 600,000 students in the universities. The lecturers are less than 10,000. You have a student to lecturer ratio of more than about 60 to 1. This was in 20 years ago, this was about a ratio of 30 to 1. So you can see where we are going. The lecturers deal with high student numbers. They are overworked, really. There are no holidays. You have seen the universities moving towards the trend of they want to generate income. So they teach, you have self-sponsored students, and the lecturers teach them back to back, without holidays, without time for research, without time for consultancy and other services. So there's a real crisis. In terms of the other issues that also affect the lecturers, apart from the learners, there are the issues of medical care for university staff. It's completely, medical services have collapsed completely.
And are these captured in the CBA?
Yes.
And have you seen it being brought out?
Yes, but you see, for example, when they brought a counter offer, they completely ignored this. They want to take all these issues off the table. In fact, over the last 5 CBAs, the lecturers tried to bring all these issues on the table, but they don't want them yet. It's really sad to be a lecturer in our universities today, because if one falls ill, actually many lecturers are scared of falling ill, because there is no medical cover. I know a colleague who had to stay at the casualty, accident and emergency, for over 10 hours in an ambulance because he could not be admitted because the university was blacklisted in that hospital.
Right. And just quickly before I take my first break here, Aduda, they bring up what you say is what needs to be scratched beyond the surface, at least brought out above the surface in this discussion on the CBA and what have you. But there is the issue of blame, because as it looks right now, the government, through, of course, there's a court that say this strike is not legal. The government says that it cannot continue with any counter offer without the SRC's hand in this, and we don't have SRC commissioners right now. And the lecturers, of course, are saying that no CBA implementation, we're not going back to work. And the students are there saying we want to get back to school. There's attaching all those narratives to the different stakeholders. How are we getting it right in that?
One of the things that I think as the media need to put our spotlight on is the divergence of views, which in my view becomes diversionary. And what do I mean here? Listening last week to PS Treasury and PS Education, they were more focused on the legalese rather than the substance of the matter. For example, raising the fact that SRC is the one to do a job evaluation, which SRC has no commissioners. I think that's diversionary, because that is another process. It's Parliament that will set up that. So you cannot say we have to wait for these people to do this, and before they do job evaluation, which takes pretty long time. And then thereafter, that's when you start negotiating with the lecturers and bring them back to class. I think that's diversionary. And for us, the media, we need to spotlight on those and say, look, the issue is that lecturers have a problem. The government has its point, but we can have a compromise. Some compromises are not necessarily legalese, because you may tell people that this unconstitutional is illegal and they don't go back to work. You wouldn't go and sack all the 10,000 lecturers. And even if you did, when you open the university, who will teach? So that, is neither here nor there. It does not help. So we need to begin giving suggestions on what can help. I remember in the early years of the NAC administration, there was a strike. Professor here remembers very well. And then Professor Saitoti was the minister. One of the things I remember he did was to say, let's cut this to the chase. Forget about the legalese. Let's discuss with the lecturers what they want and what the government can do. And they came with a solution. But there's a caveat. There must be honesty. That is lacking. Because to the extent, for example, in some of the past 2 CBS, the government put something on the table, but minus the statutory deduction. Now, that in itself is in bad faith, because that leads to what Bwana Sanji is saying, that because of that, they've been blacklisted from health facilities. So it must be based on honesty, and really fidelity to the principle of utmost good faith.
Okay.
Right.
And we need to take a break here. I've seen you jot some notes. You comment on what has been brought up as we will continue with the conversation. And of course, just looking at the way forward and what we can suggest as a media. Is it our place to push the government? Is it on them? Is a full burden on the government to stop this stalemate? Or also push the WASU fraternity and the teaching fraternity to look at some of the issues that they can compromise on? Because at the end of the day, the students, some of whom are watching, just want to get back to class. We'll be back in a bit. Welcome back to Press Pass. And as we were on a break, something interesting came up in terms of as we tell the story and what has been quoted over and over again, and that is the 2017-2021 CBA, Collective Bargaining Agreement. I said comprehensive earlier. Hasn't quite been clarified or, broken down or unpacked for the people. But is it primarily the fault of the media, or actually the issues within have not been put out to the public, have not been aired, so people don't really know what is being agitated for? First, I'll give you the chance to respond to that particular issue.
Okay, let me just talk about my experience from the doctor strike, because the problem was the same. And the doctors took the time to explain to us what the CBA was about and why it matters and why it's important for us to pay doctors well. I feel that maybe professors should come down to the public and just engage us and tell us, why does this CBA matter for all of us? I've seen some of my friends who are in the public universities, the younger ones, who are not being promoted and given opportunities to advance their careers. They have explained, some of the things like the fact that the deductions are not being remitted, about the high workload, their inability to keep up with their teaching and research load. So a few people have done it, but I really urge the union to put in some more manpower and explain to the public what is happening, because I think the government is happy to just leave it as this mystical CBA and all the dons want is money. And they're going to leave it there unless we push that story and start saying, this is why this story matters to the average Kenyan, even those who are not going to be in the university. Because
eventually the longer the people stay away from class, people get frustrated.
Yes.
And now actually whereas some were actually on the side of the university dons, then they feel if it's just about the money, even you guys can probably compromise.
Yeah, and Kenyans will say, even us, we are not getting very good salaries, so why should you be paid more? Which was what the doctors were confronting. But I think, like I said, the larger issue is, why does this matter in the long term? We are talking about perennial lecturer strikes, but I think we need to ask, how much does this government value higher education? And are they willing to pay lecturers the value that they put into the economy by training all these young people who leave? And I'm sorry to say that the media has been you've really attacked the universities for the longest time, talked about mostly the inefficiencies and the problems. And so I think even the public is jaded. They are so used to this narrative of dysfunction. And they think that it is because people have degrees that the university is dysfunctional, when actually it's a management problem. And we've been talking about this management problem for the last, at least I have been talking about it for the last 8 years or so. And also there are many global trends that we are witnessing here that are not unique. The UK lecturers are also on strike because of their pensions, which is roughly the same problem, that the deductions and the benefits you're hoping to get in this case when you're retiring, yes, you won't get them. And yet actually the UK system is literally the same here. You have a central university body that takes care of lecturers in different state universities around the UK. So this is not a unique problem, and I think we lecturers need to get out of the classroom and start talking about why these issues matter to the general public, because it's a whole generation that is going to suffer because the universities are closed. And for me, that is the most tragic part of this story.
What up to the point that Prof brought up in terms of we can't just foresee or look at a picture where it's only the national government that's responsible, that the councils can actually come in and they can say that we will put this as our rate in terms of paying the lecturers, which would sort out a big part of this problem.
But the money is coming from the government still. So, you know, even if you tell the councils to talk about the salaries, the money is coming from the central government. So unless we devolve it to the counties and then the counties pay the lecturers, it will still end up back in the government's docket. But let me just say also, when you look at the US, they have the state systems, like University of California state system. So it's not just one campus where they are which they're talking about. You're talking about several campuses across the state, and the money comes from the state government. So it's still centralized, not because of managerial issues, it's because that's where the budget for paying lecturers is coming from. So as long as the salaries are coming from the central government, then we are going to have this centralized system. And also I think it's a question of history, because we started with only one university, and every time we've started another one, it has started as a constituent college of another one. So that is why we have not been able to delink the universities, because even in their formation, universities start as a constituent college of another one, and it goes all the way to the University of Nairobi. So it's still a centralized system, and that's, I think, a different question, because I think unions are important, and I think they can still go on strike for better conditions, whether the universities are separate or not. So I don't think giving this work to the councils necessarily stops the problem. If we don't want strikes, let's pay the lecturers well.
Okay. And just in the part of explaining, what are the top key issues within the 2017-2021 CBA that you want addressed, besides just the money?
Yes, the 2017-2021 CBA is actually structured at two levels. Normally we have what is called the national CBA and a CBA negotiated at the level of individual universities. Okay. Now, the university councils have, as IPCCF, have insisted that what should be discussed in the national CBA should be mainly two items. One, the basic salary, and two, house allowance. The lecturers did not want it that way. In fact, we've tried to bring in many other issues. For example, the issue she's brought in, pension. Pension is a big problem in our universities. I have a colleague, a professor of medicine, who has retired. His pension is 20,000 shillings per month. His medical care, because he's elderly, is more than 30,000 shillings per month. Yet, the pension, government today retains pension of more than 4 billion in the national treasury. They admitted it as such during the education committee session that Mr. Duda referred to. So we have a big crisis, and the government knows it, and it can be solved. So if in the UK, yes, lecturer on strike precisely because of pension, we also have an issue because of pension, and they know this is a matter that can be sorted out. I think she's mentioned maybe whether perhaps the counties can be involved. It's not possible because of our constitutional framework. You know, within the constitution, there are some things that belong to the national government and some things that belong to the county. For education, it's really pre-primary that belongs to the counties. All the rest of it is in the national government, including primary, secondary, and university education. So university education is a matter that is handled by the national government in terms of payment of salaries, and others must come from the national treasury. I would like maybe to comment on what Mr. Duda said before the break, that the government maybe, and maybe some people may think that the government has a reason to blame the Salaries and Remuneration Commission job evaluation, that because it has not been completed, it should delay the CBA. The court decided, the Employment and Labor Relations Court decided in the case of Kenya National Union of Nurses versus the SRC. And the court clearly stated that job evaluation and collective bargaining process are not tied together. They must be delinked. And this is an issue that I think the press is, the case is available online. We can give references. I think the press can usually look at this. Usually we see them doing nice summaries of what happened in the court. And this is something they can also comment and give independent
The job
views.
evaluation, even though, as you say, it has been decided to be delinked, are you for it, the job evaluation, as was?
Yes, we are for a fair job evaluation. What Uwasu said was that it needs involvement in the job evaluation.
Involvement
because
of who?
because of the unions and academic staff. Because you are evaluating the jobs of employees. Worldwide, when you're doing job evaluation, you should also ask the employees, what are your opinions? What is it you think about the job, the kind of job you do? And then eventually you'll come up with a grading scheme for the job evaluation exercise. Now, SRC tried to come up with, it came up with a preliminary report on the job evaluation exercise, and it came out clearly that they completely never understood the type of work university lecturers did.
Yes.
So, for example, in the university, they thought a chairman of department is the senior most in a department. Yet, in our department, as Prof will know, is a chairman of a department is an administrative position. It could be the junior most. Yeah, it is simply administrative.
Right.
So, rating that job higher than, say, a professor, it is something unimaginable.
Yes.
And Prof is the chairman of Commission for University Education, and they have given very stringent promotion criteria, appointment and promotion criteria. SRC completely disregarded that. They said, you know, maybe in terms of publications, your academic qualification, degrees, years of service is completely irrelevant. Is the type of job you do, for example, as a chairman of department, that really makes you a very important person. So we realized that really they were valuing any administrative type of work over academic work.
And
Yeah,
in fact, sorry to say,
Yes, and then
the problem of university education today is this neoliberal logic that you can evaluate universities by market value. So what the SRC Commission did was to go and ask how many people do you control or order around and how much money is in your budget. And then they used that to evaluate academic positions, which is ridiculous. And yet we see this happening over and over again. Business people coming to evaluate us, our academic work, but nobody ever comes to ask me to go to an industry and find out what work do you do. Do you switch on the machine? Do you run this conveyor belt? Then you should get more money than the guy who is sitting in the office pushing papers. So that kind of arrogance, sorry to say, this business arrogance of coming to universities and deciding they know what we do needs to end. And we need to be taken seriously as academics. And that goes across the board, whether we are talking about public or private universities.
All right, and let's just get it straight. This job evaluation, and I want to give Prof some good time to respond to this, but as we told the story, have we made it look like the job evaluation is a criteria or requirement for us to move forward in this stalemate? But the job evaluation by SRC.
No, as a media person,
What's the position on that issue?
what happened and why this is why I raised it is that it was raised in Parliament, but we never questioned it. In fact, I'm happy with what Bwana Sanja said here. We need to have raised that because looking at it, even weighting of what matters in any job is very critical.
Yes.
For example, is it research? Is it teaching? Is it your community service? What are we rating at what level? What is the grading? So I think that one, as a media, we should have raised it and in fact said this is a smoke screen. Is not pertinent to the issue at heart here. And he's also articulated the fact that there was a precedent set in the case of the doctors, which should have helped us in discussing this. And I think, therefore, moving forward and to help the conversation and then eliminate these side shows, we should be sticking to the issues and throwing out these ones, because you can just see this just being thrown there to distract everybody.
Right.
Be it the lecturers, be it the public, and be it the media.
But is it a requirement now? Is it being made as a requirement that they have to be evaluated, and then that's how they determine how they
No, it's being made by the court had pronounced itself on it.
Okay.
So I think there is a precedent already said that even that articulation in Parliament, we should have put a rider. Then in as much as PS Treasury was insisting on this, the court had made this articulation on it.
Right. In terms of the standards and grading and rating, how do we go about it? What parameters do we use?
Let me make 2 comments.
Yes.
Or 3. One, I think it is important for us to understand that media has a role to play in informing the public.
Yes.
So it's very important that when we unpack this CBA of 2017-2021, the media should take a stand and a frontline stage. Take a stage where you are informing the public, because this strike is affecting every home in this country right now, as we speak. And if this strike is premised on the fact that there is a CBA which has not been honored, then we need to know what this CBA is all about. Number 2, I think the university sector is the highest level of human resource development in any country. And it is not something in which you should play with rules such as the rules which are perpetuated by SRC. I think it is important for us to have some self-regulating system which allows us to determine the procedures, the criteria, and the standards. Now, these standards should also not be cast on stone. We should be able to understand that the individual universities will have different approaches as to how they attract their human resource capital, how they manage those people, and how they remunerate them, and how they move forward. Granted that these public universities were all started as one, I think we should converse on this as a country. Is this the way we should continue holding this sector at ransom sometimes? If you go by the number of students who were attracted to apply to universities, some public universities were attracting only 4 applicants. Yeah. Others were attracting thousands of students, where perhaps there is a professor or there are professors.
Yes, yes.
So should we say, if a university is only able to attract 4 students in an admission cycle, a professor there should be treated the same as a professor teaching in a place where perhaps they have attracted 10,000 students, or a professor in a department which has only 2 students in a cohort? Is it the same professor or comparable professor to one who is teaching about 500 students? I think let's converse on these matters vividly, candidly, openly, and ask ourselves, number 1 problem, there is a strike. How do we get out of the strike? So let the CBA be known. Let us isolate those issues. Let us create the way forward and out, the way out of that quagmire collectively, because this interests both the lecturers and the public and the government. I think we are not in a dichotomous situation where we are seeing the lecturers as one arm,
yes,
opposed to an arm called the government or an arm called the Ministry of Education. I think it's important for us to sit down and ask ourselves, these strikes, can we stop them? And if we were to stop them, what best practices should we emulate from UK, from wherever? I mean, there are strikes everywhere, but they have a way of how those strikes are resolved without causing havoc to the university students' academic pursuit, because that will affect our economic development.
Yes.
We will find ourselves in a situation where we will not have enough doctors for our hospitals, we will not have enough engineers, we will not have even enough teachers for our schools.
Yes.
Real quick, I ask, Professor, and please don't, when I bring a program, you'll still approve if it's good. Yeah. But can I ask, what is the role of the commission in all this? Have they spoken on behalf of the lecturers? Because the only time we see the commission is when they're coming to wave a stick at our programs and telling us that there are no doors on our classrooms.
Yes.
So what is it that what is the Commission's voice in this matter?
We have a voice. We have had meetings, and this gentleman can respond to that, with the WASU fraternity. We have discussed with a number of other university leaders, including chairmen of councils. We are part and parcel of how to resolve this problem, in the sense that this problem affects quality. And the Commission for University Education is the institution which is given the authority by law to assure Kenyans that the education which is going on in the universities is of qualitative value. If you find a situation where the strike has prolonged and the students are called back after attending class for only 4 weeks, and they are given an exam which they should have been given after attending class for 16 weeks, that affects us, and we have pronounced ourselves on it. So it's important for us to see that the way the WASU is propagating its case might not be directly what we do, but we are concerned about their rights.
Okay.
We are concerned about their values. We are concerned about the issues. That's why, as I sit here, I would like to be informed very clearly what is contained in this CBA 2017-2021.
All right. Someone might say if you're part of the solution and as chair of the commission, you actually should have been briefed by them if you have indeed met with WASU in this stalemate. And we'll get to that in this last part after the break. Welcome back. The last part of the program. As part of the address by WASU earlier today, the union, through its Secretary General, said that they will not allow the fall of or the public universities to fall, as they see a conspiracy to drive the numbers to private universities. Let's listen.
But as a union, we are not going to allow public universities to collapse so that private universities thrive. Because we are seeing far. There's a scheme whereby some individuals want higher education sector to collapse so that their private universities can thrive. We are not going to allow that.
So a strong sentiment there by the Sec Gen. Is this a warranted conspiracy that you see in terms of, yes?
Oh, I'm so glad WASU is finally talking about it. We've been talking about it for like 2-3 years. We're waiting for the union to pick it up. But yes, I know I'm from a private university, but I am very uncomfortable about public money being paid to private institutions for students. I think private universities should handle their own business, market as well as they can, and attract students, but the public money should go to public universities. And the reason I'm saying this is because what will happen is that we will have entrepreneurs starting universities, not because they care about university education,
right,
but because they know they don't have to work hard at building their institutions, because the government is going to bring the money from government students. I think public-sponsored students should go to public universities, let the private universities work their way around it. And this is part of the privatization agenda that some of us have been talking about, that public institutions are undergoing privatization, where public money is being paid to private people for public services. And you know, the worst thing about that is that the public can never get to know how their money was spent. They are just told these students were taken to University X, which is private, but the citizens don't get to know whether the public was served by their funds going to a private university. So I'm in agreement on that. I think public sponsored students should be at public universities.
All right, and Prof,
yes,
this conspiracy that has been brought up by the Sec Gen, And first of all, someone might not blame someone wanting to, a parent wanting to move their child from a public university because there's a lot of strikes, moving them to a private university where it will be uninterrupted. But as you watch this, what they're saying is a conspiracy. What's your position on it?
I think feel for them, number one, but I also want them to understand the following facts. The first fact that I would like people to understand is that these students who are being sponsored by the Kenyan money, public money, in private universities are Kenyans. Secondly, good systems liberalize the admission process. So students just choose to study where they want to study, and the sponsorship will depend on whether they have secured government or public sponsorship, or it is going to be private sponsorship. In the long run, when these individuals graduate, they are going to be joining the same workforce, the same market, the same system. So I don't think that the argument should be like, since you are going into a private university, the government of Kenya or the public, the people of Kenya, have no business in addressing your needs if you so apply to be given that opportunity. Number two, this public-private university conspiracy, which we are talking about, how many private universities would be able to meet the numbers of public universities? We are talking about very insignificant figures in terms of those students who have been admitted into private university programs. And those private university programs are perhaps very special programs which these students have sought. Let's say, for example, right now it is general knowledge that the law school at Strathmore, which is not even accepting government-sponsored students, they only say they admit students directly who are able to pay for them. But there are students who would have aspired, whether they are sponsored by public money or no public money, to go and study at Strathmore, the law school, or to go and study at a university which is well renowned, whether it is public or private. So at the end of the day, this debate will have to be consolidated. And before we jump into conclusions about whether it is a conspiracy to kill public universities by allowing private universities to benefit from public money, we needed to ask ourselves, where did the idea come from? And how come then that students, given free will, are able to select programs which are offered in private universities and not public universities?
Yes.
Yeah. Perhaps I could comment on
Prof
that.
first, yeah.
And I find Prof's argument completely interesting. You see, where the idea came from, at least how it was put to the public.
Yeah.
When they first admitted, when they floated this idea of admitting students to private universities, they said, look, the public universities have no capacity to absorb all these students, and therefore, let's take some of them to private universities. Now, he has said that a university, a public university, got 4 students. A private university got thousands of students. And now they are changing the argument that these people have a right to choose. They can choose, for example, Strathmore Law School. I have no problem with Strathmore Law School.
Yes.
But some of those schools have not produced any advocate. Do we know any advocate from those schools is mentioned? That somebody will say, I want to go to this school because I know advocates so and so. These arguments really have changed. And I think we would disagree completely. Perhaps part of the reason, if you look at the commission is chairing now, they introduced an amendment secretively in 2016 and changed the composition of the Commission for University Education. Right now, you have those private universities sitting there in his board and chatting with him. And that's why now they have this, perhaps, these nice neoliberal arguments, as my colleague has said. Now let the market choose itself.
I think Che has always had both.
Yes.
Che before
Yes.
CUE.
Yes.
Che has always had private and public universities represented. In fact, the old law, Chair had 2 private university vice chancellors sitting in the board and 2 public universities.
What was the effect of Universities Amendment Act of 2016 on the board, on the composition of the board?
Each one of those sectors is represented
Is the
in
private,
the board.
private sector got a higher increment in representation? Right. And we are actually moving there. So perhaps this conspiracy theory is actually right.
There's actually some substance. Real quick,
and also the argument that now a private university has a better school is precisely why the lecturers of the public universities are going on strike, because they're not getting the support they need to have the beautiful law school that a private university has. And it's because we are not paying the people in the public universities well. I think the government money should not be going to private universities, because it's going to open the doors for tenderpreneurs who will set up universities just to receive government money for their institutions. But also, what are we saying about poor students? That they don't deserve good universities in their homes, in their home counties? Are we saying that lecturers in public universities should not be doing well? And let me just say, I know I'm the wrong person to tetea for public universities, but also standards in private universities will start to go down if the public universities go down, because there's no competition. Our competition has always been the public universities. We have always benchmarked ourselves with the public universities. It is important that public universities are the centers of excellence in a country, not just because they are because they are the public universities and they represent the value that the Kenyan wananchi place on university education.
Right.
If we go down this road of privileging private universities, we are going to have a situation where it is the rich only who get good education, and that is not right. The government must invest in public universities.
And right in there's a big story, and
Right.
I mean, it might be forgotten here in the conversation of the strike, but there's a big story to pursue.
All right, true. But I want us to also move the conversation to look at 2 things which are a manifestation of a bigger thing. First, the university strike, and 2, the recent admissions that Professor just alluded to. What we've seen out of them have told us that there are many fundamental issues in higher education that we have to deal with. What are these? One is funding. And funding here will deal with funding for both public and private in the sense of the sources and the beneficiaries. 2, we'll need to deal with the question of the supply side, because we've had in the past 10 or so years lived a lie, in the sense that there was an oversupply of students to the universities. Now we've seen the last 2 years the number has gone down. Again, there is a challenge there, because the number has gone down in a manner that's unbelievable. And I always argue, there's no way in a cohort of 600,000 students like last year.
69,000.
No, 600,000 students who sat KCSE last year.
Yes.
Only 142 got A. And that in total, 69,000
Yes,
get
that's
C
right.
plus and above.
Yes.
I think that's an anomaly. It doesn't represent the real statistics. So what am I saying? That we need to start looking at the supply and the demand side, but we should not begin creating roadblocks or creating what I would call false impressions. Like now, we are creating a false impression of the supply side. So you have to deal with that. Then the third thing we have to deal with is the question of governance and management of universities. And Dr. Ndia alluded to this. And this should cut across all the universities, public and private. One of the things, with due respect to Professor Chacha, I know public universities have always repulsed attempts for them to be quality checked. They always come and say, you know, the law says that we are autonomous. So they don't want to be checked what they're doing. And then, in that case, they do so many things which may not be right. But again, the private universities, some of them have, for example, you're not clear about the composition of the councils or even the appointment of the chancellors. So you find some unfair liaisons which give the vice chancellor so much power because he or she selects who sits in the council. And that creates a problem when there's governance. And you know, there are examples that we can talk about. Already, I know, for example, the Commission for University Education had put some 3 universities on notice. One of them is the Presbyterian in Kikuyu. University that had very, very good facilities. Where was the problem? Management. So we also need to deal with that.
Yes.
And as media, we need to be dealing with this holistically so that you don't look at just the fact that CUE has closed this. We look at how did we arrive there.
Right.
But also, we must talk about how the media had a festival of bashing universities without understanding the underlying issues that contributed to some of the problems. And I remember I used to keep making noise about it. For example, we had KEPSA and other business people trashing degrees as useless to the market, which was so unfair. And these things were repeated in the media and they were never challenged. So now the public has become jaded. When the universities are closed, they don't think there's a crisis because they say, after all, a university degree doesn't get you a job. So that ideology of connecting university degrees only to the market and to always depict universities as sites of dysfunction with no explanation of how we got there is partly the reason why now, by the time we have the lecturer strike, the public is jaded. They can't hear any more bad stories
But I
about
hope
the
you're not suggesting that
universities.
KEPSA should not speak their views. You know, they are the guys who receive your students.
Yeah, but when we
so
challenge
if they speak,
Yeah.
we also give them the voice to say what they want to say.
Yeah, but
because
for example,
in the arrangement of the university setup, you have the parents, students, lecturers, and all this. Then you have the output students who go to the market. If the market tells you that, I think as a media, we have a role to say it so that you can also see how to deal with that.
Take it as feedback. Yes. And we need to, we have less than 10 minutes to conclude because this has shown us a story that needs to be pursued. And in our closing remarks, as you came, of course, you had something that you really wanted to bring out, and this is your chances. I bring it to you. And I'll start with Bwana Osanjo, because it seems that you played the cards really close in terms of the CBA, so people don't quite understand or are not, you know, on your side in terms of understanding what your plight is. So is this something that you can commit to put out in the public sphere?
Yes, I think the CBA has been published by a number of media houses. I think maybe this media house has not published
in terms of really
the contents,
yes.
But we can also explain it. As I said, the government as well as the university councils insisted that really what should be discussed in the national CBA was the basic salary as well as the house allowances. Then the rest of the terms and conditions of service will be discussed with the individual university councils. And there are many issues to be discussed in those, in the work environment, the learning environment, the things we've been talking about. I would like to also maybe add a point on what Mr. Duda has said as the priorities. We agree chronic underfunding of universities is a key matter. In the Universities Act, they introduced the University Funding Board to fund using the differentiated unit costs. That has really driven down funding of public universities. It needs to be looked at as well. Again, governance, we've seen the appointments of vice chancellors and the rules. I think we need to scrutinize all these amendment bills that are passing through Parliament, like the Universities Act Amendment Bill of 2016. I think the media should look at the changes it brought. The lecturers are complaining. The students are complaining about it. Yesterday you heard about there was an election at the University of Nairobi. The students were not happy, and it's because of the changes brought through this amendment. So they need to be scrutinized. The other key thing in the university is the human resource capacity. We are having brain drain. I mean, people are running away even from universities to go to other sectors. For example, maybe if you're teaching law, some people may want to serve in the judiciary because the terms and conditions of service are better there. If you are a lecturer at medical school, some want to go to civil service because our students in civil service earn far much higher than us, for example, and the terms are now much better.
Yes.
But now, in terms of the roadmap, Parliament provided a good roadmap that the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury was ordered to give a counter-offer to the unions. If that is done, the strike, this thing will be negotiated, and then the strike will end in a matter of a few days. Let them do this, and then we'll have tranquility in the universities for the next 5 years or so years.
Yes.
That is the roadmap.
Is it correct to say that the government has not been committal to bring this to an end, because that's what has been the perception that's been given by WASU, especially earlier? You want to talk, but they're not ready or willing.
Yes, we don't know what's the problem. I think some branches of government are ready to solve this crisis. For example, as I've mentioned, Parliament. We don't know. The Cabinet Secretary for Education has been aloof. We have been seeing her, having those homecoming parties. But there is a big matter in university education that is there. So we want them to be more proactive so that this matter is sorted and the students go to class.
All right.
Yes.
And in terms of setting the agenda, Duda, now to you, is it our place to push the government to take it more seriously?
Yeah, we have to push all the parties interested here. I agree entirely that the government has not shown some demonstrable inclination to resolving this. And that's why I started by saying that I hear some of the presentations before Parliament and all that, I see they're just digressing. We must deal with this. Cabinet Minister Amina, for example, has not seized herself of this matter very seriously and thinks she needs to take charge.
Well, the
of
few
this.
times she's appeared, she has stuck to the issue that this is not protected by law, the strike.
Yes, and I've always argued that those are statements that are neither here nor there.
Yes.
It will not take lecturers back to class. You need to find out, this is what the law says, but what will be practical solution? It's not flagging the law. Secondly, WASU should also find a way of moving beyond the bread and butter. Because the impression that is coming in the public is that every time you see WASU is about bank and my money. I think you need to change the narrative that, fine, we are looking for this because of ABCD, because lecturers deserve to be paid, and it's not just that they deserve to be paid, they need to offer quality education for the national good of all of us. So I think we need to change that narrative. Lastly, the problem of university education underlies other problems in the entire education sector. We talked briefly about TVET. We talked briefly about high school. We need to look at this as a continuum. How do we deal with basic education, mid-level education to university and post, university education, because we need to have a continuum so that we deal with this thing holistically.
All right. Professor Chacha, in terms of your position as a commission on this strike, and what can bring it to an end?
Okay, I would like to mention three things. One is that all of us should be committed to finding solutions to end the strike. Because if we are not committed, then the students will suffer, and the public will suffer, and everybody will suffer, including the economy. I also want to mention that as we grow this sector, we need to understand that the university sector is very dynamic. It requires constant evaluation by you people in the media to inform the public, but at the same time, for us to be able to continue managing this sector, we need to put all the issues on the table, not under the table. It is important that we should periodically review all these terms of service and look at whether we can continue managing our university education system with what we have, or it requires improvement. And this improvement should even come gradually without being necessitated by a strike. Because I think this dynamic nature of university education should give us also the capacity, by having professors in that union and all this, should give us the capacity to be able to reason together. So it's important that we take the reasoning as the guiding principle for our argument, I want to assure everybody that the Commission will continue dealing with Kenyans in university education without discrimination as far as public and private universities are concerned. We will be regulating all of them, and in fact, that idea that public universities used to refuse to be regulated is no longer valid, because we do address issues and challenges in both public and private universities.
All right.
And in this regard, I think it's important for us to note that we will continue to have challenges of leadership and management, to have challenges of financing and funding, but universities must be here. We cannot, for example, wish them away. We cannot say that we are going to close all the universities because we can't afford to pay lecturers. We can't afford to create opportunities for the students who are aspiring to go to the university. But while we converse this, we should take note of the fact that in the education sector, there are new developments, including the creation of TVETA institutions, which also are aspiring to be absorbing some of these students who would ideally have destined themselves in universities, both private and public universities, attending courses.
All right.
So it's important. And lastly, the question about student union elections and amendments. I observed the student union elections of the University of Nairobi a few days ago. Very peaceful. And the students were telling us that that transformation from what procedures they used to have to the new procedures which have been guided by that amendment has helped them. There was no student who was hurt. There has not been even any news by the media about the students' elections in the University of Nairobi, and the people died.
There were misgivings as to how it went.
Okay. Okay, anyway, whatever it is, I think it is better. From an observation standpoint, I believe that this time around we had better operations than the previous time.
Some people actually read a bit of other conspiracies and how it was carried out, because it seemed like it was either hurried and was hidden, and basically you say it didn't cause any, there was no havoc, maybe because it was under wraps for many. Yes, just a quick one.
Yes.
Is it your place as the chair of the Commission of University Education to give leadership in terms of the Daystar University? It's been closed and there's issues of management and leadership.
Yes, we have already pronounced ourselves on the Daystar University challenges. We have addressed some of the issues, even as they were grappling with the challenges which ended up in this closure. We already had sent their team to take a quick inspection, and we do have a report as to how the university was addressed or advised to mitigate some of the challenges. The fact that we have reached here is because perhaps the universities usually take a circumlocuted route to solve problems without going straight to providing answers and remedies for the issues.
Yes.
I'm hoping that both private and public universities, we will now start learning how to minimize the management of resources, misuse of those resources, misapplication of procedures. And I think it's important for us to say, why are university leaders, both private and public perhaps, mismanaging their own resources?
This is in answering the question on Daystar. Is this something in terms of what you're saying? Are they findings from what you have deduced?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to ask ourselves several questions that students, parents, management, trustees, and even the institution, if it is a faith-based institution, which started the university, they have a stake. And I think it's good to have a system that involves all of them in finding solutions to the challenges.
Hope of it opening soon?
I don't run Daystar. We don't run universities.
Based on what you're following?
No, we only guide the universities in terms of giving them some support and backstopping.
Yes. So you just sent your representatives and you've left it up to them to sort it out?
Yeah, because we can't be seen as a regulator to be running the system we regulate.
Yes, of
we only tell them areas which we think need to be addressed,
Okay.
and it is up to them, according to their own rules and instruments, to address those problems.
Certainly. Okay. All right. Thank you for that. And finally, Dr. Wandia, you had your other comment as well that you've been tweeting about all week. You can make that at the tail end as you make your final submission.
I think the thing, I always talk to we the people. I think the thing Kenyans need to know is that any tertiary educational institution is where people practice democracy. So if we are not practicing democracy in the TVETs and the colleges and the universities, we are raising the next generation of dictators. So universities and other tertiary institutions must practice the democracy we want modeled for the rest of the country.
Yes.
And also we are talking about people who are already voters. Many university students are 18 and above. So we cannot keep on waving the stick at students and forcing them to accept things that that the citizens are not accepting.
Yes.
But even the high school students have said the same. The other thing I just want to say is that we really need to be concerned about the sacrifice of a whole generation of youth who are not going to university right now. I'm sorry, but I'm very suspicious of the camaraderie between the government and the private sector as concerns education. We had too many comments from the private sector about education, and they never wanted to be held to account for what they are saying. And since they are also concerned about employment, I'm very suspicious that they are not part of the conspiracy to keep our young people out of tertiary institutions, so that you depress the wages and you can give people part-time jobs for the rest of their lives. And this is a problem that we must discuss when we're talking about the economy. The fact that the permanent and pensionable jobs are reducing, and our youth who are starting families, they're getting jobs without healthcare, without permanent terms. And I think part of undermining the universities is to avoid the youth coming out and saying, we know there is money, we know you have 4 billion to pay to NHIF, how come there's no money for us to have jobs with healthcare? Those are the questions that politicians would not like us to answer, and I think that's why they're not concerned about what's happening in the universities.
Right.
And it will be a tragedy for so many young people whom we have already sacrificed with the terrible KCSE results, to be sacrificed once again by not opening the university doors and just committing ourselves to give Kenyan youth a good education. And then also now I'll talk about Winnie Mandela. I am very sad that the media picked headlines from international media that didn't portray Winnie Mandela in a good way. And yet Winnie Mandela was the mother of Africa, not just South Africa. Right. And it goes to show, and that's partly our fault, we don't teach international relations very well because, again, the private sector has been telling students that international relations and history don't build bridges. So our journalists are coming out not knowing how important some international stories are. And that's why I'm saying, even when Mr. Duda is talking about the role of different players in the education sector, we really need to put the spotlight on private universities, because I don't trust that they have the goodwill of Kenyans at heart.
All right. On that note, I decided to give you a chance so that you don't think that I was ignoring whatever feedback you send on Twitter or any other platform, whether it's an email or whatnot. Send it our way. And yes, we are here to take the suggestions and your feedback in terms of how we can make our work better as journalists. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the themes that you have helped us explore. There's so much more to talk about in higher education, and I'm sure Bwana Duda, even as we spoke earlier, we haven't even addressed at the half of it. Exactly. But thank you for your time, gentlemen and lady, and we'll be following this particular story moving forward. Yes, the big story today has been from the IEBC. Possibly that's going to be the focus in this coming week on Press Pass. Thank you for watching. Have yourself a good night.